Hello, I'm Vimal Chandran, a visual artist, and this is my masterclass. I'm a multidisciplinary visual artist and I majorly work with illustration, photography, and film. I have been painting ever since I was a kid. My dad bought me a box of watercolor and a color palette when I was around 4, and it's been a part of me ever since. So academically, but I studied engineering and I started doing my software job in an MNC. But in 2013, I quit my job and I moved completely from my engineering stream to visual art. Visual art is made of many elements such as painting, graphic design, and photography. The job of a visual artist is to combine these elements together to tell a story. In this masterclass, I will take you through some of my artworks and the thought process behind each of those artworks. And I will also talk about my approach towards visual storytelling. Since you are an artist and you are participating in an Art of Motorcycling Season 2, you will be sharing your stories through visuals. So hopefully this masterclass can help you to add some extra magic to your artwork. You draw inspiration from anything and everything around you. It's as simple as that. They say steal like an artist, and that's what I try to do. For me, it's like I get inspired from everything: music, poetry, movies, random conversation, architecture, travel, talking to a stranger. So whenever I encounter something interesting, I usually store it in my brain. And later, when I encounter some other situation, I try to connect these two situations together seamlessly and create a narrative of my own. So each time when you encounter a situation, you're actually absorbing or stealing ideas from your surrounding, and through your imagination, you convert them and create something of yourself. So it's like the Godard told, it's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to. For example, I usually carry a sketchbook. So when I reach some place and when I see some monuments or landscape or some situation, I try to create an artwork based on that situation plus some of my previous imagination. So it's not going to be an exact replica of what I see at that particular moment. It's inspired from that moment plus my previous experience. That's how I create my sketchbook illustrations, which are very random, which are created on the spot. But it's not just the replica of the place. It's something like my own previous experience and my experience that I have at that particular point of time. So recently I did a series called Folk Sci-Fi, which is exploring the Indo-Futurism series. So one day I visited a temple festival near my native, and I clicked a lot of random pictures out there. And once I came back home, I went through all the pictures that I clicked, and I came up with the first illustrated version of it, which is called a painting or an illustration titled The Arrival, which is based on a temple horse possession happened in that temple. So in this particular case, I used my photographs as a base reference point to start the illustration. To put your idea on paper, you need to first be able to articulate it. You can do that through words, through sketch, or through photographs. Pick whatever works for you and capture the essence of the idea. I usually carry a sketchbook around along with a watercolor set. So whenever I encounter a situation, what I usually do, I'll do a random sketch and I'll make a random illustration and I'll keep it with me. So that is one of my repository of idea. And the next one I usually carry is a camera or a mobile phone. Whenever I see a situation or whenever I see something interesting, I do take a random picture and keep it ready for me to look into it later. So these are the two things I usually do. Articulate the idea. Now, if you want to create something, you just go through, your repository of all these ideas. Something like just go through your sketchbook or go through the photograph you clicked, and you might get something interesting from them. So in this part, what you need to do is like it's going to be a rough idea. So basically you can just do an outline, or you can create in your mind what would be the best way to tell this particular story. So you might come up with different options, but in this stage, just try out different options. Just play it with whatever available in your repository. So for me, the first draft is something like a rough sketch. I just play around with the elements and try to do different version of it. I might not finalize anything at this particular stage, but I will have that a random rough sketch which can be used as a baseline to continue to develop further. So when I want to create something either for myself or like commissioned illustration or something like that, I just go through all this repository of ideas like photographs, poetry, or the random sketches, etc., and I try to connect them together. So once I connect them together, I might come up with different options, and then in this stage my next step is to find out what is the best option to go forward. So once I selected the story to narrate, then I decide on the medium, which medium to take forward. So I work with different mediums like photography, illustration, or film, etc., etc. So once I understand the story, then I decide which one should I take moving forward. So for me, idea dictate the medium. Once I decide to go with a particular medium, say illustration, and I have an idea, I'll try to do some rough sketches. This might be random scribbles on paper. I'll try placing the elements in different styles and figure out what works and what does not. Sometimes, in this stage, I'll have an exact visualization of my final output, or at least 90% of it. But in some other case, I'll have only 50%, but I start with whatever is available, and the process take me to figure out the rest of the things. The second approach I generally use for making a film or photograph. I will try to improvise on the go, and I feel that makes it more organic. So there is no right or wrong way to do it, but just try whatever you are comfortable in. Once I have my idea on the canvas, my computer in this case, it's time to get creative. Playing around with different ideas. This process is all about trying to visualize what ideas will work for the art and what ideas won't. It's all about finding the best way to tell the story through visuals. By the end of this creatively simulating journey, I try and visualize what the final artwork should look like and start working towards it. So in this section, I basically do some random scribbles and rough sketches and trying to figure out what are the different elements needed for this particular illustration. So I sort of play around with all the elements and place it in the different part of the canvas and finalize the placement of all my elements. So after placing the elements, my next step is to find out what is the color palette of this particular illustration. Once I decide on the color palette, then I move into the next stage. So for an example, in case of the folk sci-fi, my first illustration was The Arrival. In this particular illustration, I had two characters, two main characters. One is the folk sci-fi element, which is that horse, and there is a small kid looking at it. So in the initial stage, I placed around all these two characters in the different part of the frame and find out what is the best approach to tell this particular story. And I also decided the color palette at this point of time. Now we have figured out the elements of the illustration and the overall structure of the illustration, even the color palette of the illustration. So let's deep dive into the technical aspect of it. Let me help you to figure out what are the best software or what are the other tools that we can use to express your ideas better. So what I'm going to do right now is like I'm going to create one of the illustration from my series Folk Sci-Fi. I'm going to tell you how I started it from the scratch, and how I'm going to add different elements to it and create the final illustration. So the name of this artwork is The Contact, where I'm trying to reimagine a character which is called Darige from my native in an entirely different, science fiction environment. So let's start with a rough sketch. Here I'm doing this one as a digital illustration. So I'm doing it on iPad. I use Procreate on iPad Pro. So that's my tool for this particular illustration. So if you are doing a digital illustration, you can also do it on your PC or on your laptop. And you can also use different tools like Illustrator, Photoshop, uh, or Procreate, etc., etc. And if you are using an analog tool, something like a watercolor or a oil painting or an acrylic, you can do this thing on a in a traditional way. If you are an analog illustrator using any of the analog tools like watercolor or oil painting or acrylic, you can do it on the paper also, and later you can scan it or take a photograph of it and convert it into digital and use it as a final artwork. So basically, the final artwork currently going to be a digital format. So you can either do it directly digitally, or you can do it in an analog way and later convert it into a digital format. So let's start with a rough sketch. So in the rough sketch scenario, what I'm going to do right now is like I'm basically doing a very uh, you know in very initial kind of a sketch where I'm trying to place different elements of my artwork. So here, my idea is like there is a character called Darige in my native, which is from the Hindu mythology. So this folk character I'm trying to reinterpret in a science fiction environment. So I am reimagining this character in a larger than life figure, and it's interacting with one of my childhood memory of meeting this character when I was a kid. So that's the whole idea of the illustration. So in this illustration, I am currently going to do this rough sketch by placing the two major characters. One is the sci-fi version of this Darige, and the other one is like human beings interacting with it. So here I'm trying to make different elements, just keeping the uh, rough sketch in a way that I can replace this element later. So in this stage, what will happen is like I just create the frame, which is the main character and which is the sub characters, and what's the landscape and everything I'll decide on this particular stage. You can play around with all the elements at this stage. So in this particular illustration, I wanted it in a way like the main character, that is the sci-fi character, has to be larger than life figure. So it's near to my hometown. I am imagining this character is standing in front of a paddy field, and the human character interacting with this major sci-fi character standing near the paddy field. So the landscape is going to be a what do you call a big paddy field, and there are trees in between. It's similar to my native in Kerala. Let's also finalize the what we call the geography or the landscape for this particular illustration. So once I do the initial sketch, this act as a base for my original artwork. Okay, so now I create next layer on top of this and remove the initial layer. So before that, I will also want to select the color palette for this particular illustration. So in this stage I have decided that okay, this might be look bit like greenery and in the tinge of blue, black and green. So I decided the that particular what we call color palette at this stage, because I want the atmosphere look much like a rainy, the atmosphere should look like it's about to rain and all. So I selected this particular color tone for the illustration. So now I apply the background colors and everything, and I will start redrawing these characters one by one on top of the initial rough sketch. So in this stage I will redraw all the major characters and try to improvise all this character at this particular stage with adding more details. So once I do the two major character, I'll try to improve on the location, I mean the geography of this particular illustration by adding the elements in the foreground as well as in the background. So you can do each elements in different layers, so that if you want to remove any of the layer later, you can also do that. Or if you want to change that particular layer, then you have to work on that layer only, so that it won't affect the rest of the illustration. To add details, you can zoom in and add more details to each of these characters. So after this, the last step is like adding more details, giving the final touches for this illustration, like adding cranes in the foreground and some birds flying in the backdrop, and even the trees. So all these things combined together create a 2D version of the final illustration. So once I do the 2D version of the illustration, what I do is like I use the different layers in Adobe After Effects and try to make an animation. So the final output of this illustration is actually an animated version of the illustration, which I use after doing the 2D version of the illustration. And later I will add a sound design to it and create this one as the final illustration with the sound, and later I can mint it as an NFT also. For me, the essence of good art is effective storytelling. It makes your artwork relatable, engaging, and memorable. If your artwork is telling the story that you want to tell, it's doing its job. Tell a great story and your artwork will stand out. When I want to create a series of NFTs, I want to make the illustrations look authentic. That's where I started to create a series of illustrations combining characters and myths and folklores from my native with the science fiction environment. When you look around, you can see a lot of artists doing science fiction artwork, but I want to create something which is more related to my own existence. That's where I combine the characters from my native with the science fiction environment. I guess that made folk sci-fi different from rest of the crowd. Being authentic to yourself makes your stories more powerful. Create your own version of the story. I would like to say that the most important thing for any artist is not to get into the trap of what others say or what the system says to you about making art. The destination is not important, the journey is. Making mistakes are fun. It might help you to find out something new, so never be afraid to do that. And most importantly, have a lot of fun along the way. If you're enjoying the process, you already won it, and the rest of the things are just a bonus. So to end this masterclass, I would like to say that get inspired from the world around you and create your own version of it. And have fun along the way. So make sure you follow your love for telling stories through art. Create your artwork about your stories and your journeys and send in your entries.